Staying healthy, staying sexy, staying young is what living life is all about. And if you have doctors that have proven treatments that keep people young and healthy so they don't get sick, you want people to know about these treatments and that they exist.
This is Mark L. White with Health Hacks. And are you somebody who eats a lot of sugar, salt, fats, and find that when you ever try to kick the habit, it's very difficult to? Well, that might be a drug. And coming up, you're going to learn all about the processed food addiction that's sweeping the country with Dr. Joan Ifland. This episode is brought to you by GainsWave. GainsWave is a treatment done at your doctor's office to optimize erection quality without the need of Viagra, Cialis. It's non-surgical, there's no needles, and it has an amazing success rate. To find a GainsWave provider, go to gainswave.com. That's GAINSWAVE.com. This is Mark L. White with Health Hacks, and I'm here with Dr. Joan Ifland. Did I get that right, Dr. Ifland?
If it's just Ifland, it's spelled Ifland.
Dr. Ifland, where are you out of, Dr. Ifland?
I'm in Seattle, but I was just sharing that I just came back from Miami. I spoke at a conference there, and I just had a great time there. I'm jealous a little bit, you Miamians.
Yeah, in the winter time, everybody wants to come, but in the summertime, I'd rather be in Seattle.
Yes, Seattle actually is pretty cool in the summertime. It is. It's cool all the time. Come on. It's a cool city.
Right before coming onto this podcast, I was wolfing down my food, and there's this new poke bowl place downstairs, and I wanted it to be healthy because I know that there's this importance in eating whole foods. And so I got some tuna and some lettuce and some onions. But is there like a secret to eating?
Yes. Nobody's ever asked me that question in that way, but it is the right question. Absolutely. Is there a secret to eating? In westernized countries, there is one big secret, and it is secret, it's hidden, which is that processed foods, there's a tremendous amount of evidence that processed foods cause a lot of different kinds of health problems. So the big secret is learn the list of processed foods and the list of unprocessed foods, and only eat unprocessed foods.
How do we know that what we eat is processed versus unprocessed?
Okay, well, I have lists. That's a free website, Food Addiction Resources. And because I'm a researcher, I attach studies to my recommendations. So you might know that I wrote this textbook, Processed Food Addiction, over 3 years. It has 2,000 citations in it. I probably looked at 6,000 or 8,000 studies to write the book. So it's pretty remarkable how much research there is on the foods that actually cause problems. So it's sugars, flours, gluten, dairy, processed fats, caffeine, food additives, excessive salt. Anytime that you've put too much of one thing into a package, you have a processed food.
So take us before the 1960s and 70s, when we actually cooked real foods. Didn't we have health problems then, or did all the health problems just start when we started processing foods and creating fast foods?
Well, you see, particularly the metabolic syndrome diseases, you see them skyrocketing. You see tobacco coming into processed foods heavily in the mid-1980s. You see obesity take off, and along with it, you see diabetes, heart disease, stroke, dementia, Alzheimer's. Those kinds of things just come right along with the obesity epidemic. So no, we didn't have those rates before.
So when you mentioned tobacco, it took us decades to realize that they were killing us. Yet the tobacco industry spent decades trying to hide us from the truth and lying to the public. Do you see the same thing now with processed food companies?
Oh my goodness, yes. I'm at the point where I'm starting to write courses for professional training. So I'm just working on a segment on media. And yes, they've done the same thing. I went back and I looked at those pictures of Lauren Bacall. She's so sexy. And Humphrey Bogart is so masculine because they're smoking. You know, smoking is like the most not sexy thing out there, but that is the power of the tobacco industry to take something that's incredibly harmful and persuade the public that it's delightful and attractive, like a smoking for women. Oh, you're a rebel, or you're a modern woman if you smoke. And the processed food industry did the same thing. Oh, you're a modern woman if you use convenience foods, and you're old fashioned if you cook. So boom, fast food into the house because I'm a modern woman, right?
Well, we all are modern, but at the same time, we talk about like addiction, right? And you talk about going back. And tobacco is clearly addictive, and at the same time, the way they've marketed it to us gets us addicted. Processed foods, and you say addiction, how does it hook us?
So it's the same way, and they use the same techniques. It's called surround marketing. So they ramp up the addictive properties of the product. Like they extracted nicotine and put it back into cigarettes to make them more addictive. And then they surround the person with triggers. So everywhere in the 1950s and 60s you went, there was a cigarette vending machine, there were advertisements, the signs were up. It was it's called surround marketing. And they've done the same thing, particularly with children and sugar, where everywhere you go, there was, in my era, there was Punchy, the Hawaiian Punch character, mascot. But they use Spider-Man, and they use My Little Pony. They use all these characters that children love to get children to trust the product and then nag their parents for it. So they took that surround marketing concept from tobacco and they just laid it onto children.
But as a society, we said to the tobacco company, we're going to make it illegal to market your product to kids, and we're going to put all these barriers to marketing. Do we do the same thing to Coca-Cola?
No, I don't think we will, because with tobacco, you had 4 states. I have an undergraduate degree in economics and political science, which is very valuable for understanding what the heck happened. So with tobacco, you had 4 states. You had 4 tobacco states. You had 8 senators. They could pretty much block anything for a long time. When the Surgeon General went to study tobacco and its relationship to cancer in 1963, they found 8 hardcore medical people and 2 representatives from the tobacco industry to be on that committee, and they came out in the right place. They had great studies, a lot of different kinds of studies. It came out, tobacco causes cancer, and they were able to say that. Fast forward 15 years to 1980, when we're trying to come up with the dietary guidelines. 12 people on the committee, 7 of them are from the food industry. So that didn't work. And plus the tobacco research is very clear. It's one substance. You put it in, you get cancer, you take it out, you don't have cancer. But with processed foods, you've got this huge range and they're sold in different combinations. So to find those very clear studies is almost impossible.
So it also sounds like, because there's so many vested interests, and you're going back to economics, there's so many people that get wealthy off of our processed food addictions, that there's not going to be a political solution.
No, I absolutely do not believe that. I worked for the Wisconsin legislature for 2 years after I got out of college, and that was a wonderful legislature. Everyone's hearts were really in it. They could never have passed any anti-processed food legislation because every state is growing either corn, wheat, dairy. So you have all 50 states invested in processed foods.
So in Wisconsin, you probably weren't too popular.
Jobs.
You probably weren't too popular with the dairy farmers.
No, this was long before. So I graduated from college in 1974. I worked there until 76, and then I went to Stanford Business School, and then I went to work for a corporation in New York. I didn't get off of processed foods myself until 1996, so much later. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the addiction itself. What are the downsides of eating processed foods? We know about the obesity, we know about the diabetes, but what else is going on there?
Well, what people generally don't know about is the alterations to brain function. So you have the mood alteration, and this is true for any addictive substance. How do we know the addictive substance issue? Is because the brains of chronic processed food eaters are doing the same things as the brains of drug and alcohol. So it's active limbic system, dopamine, serotonin, endocannabinoids, and opioid systems. They're hyperfiring and they're controlling behavior. When it's like a competition between the craving centers and the frontal lobe, where you might have a rational thought like, I don't want to eat that. But when one is turned on, the other one is turned off. This is research done by Nora Volkoff. She saw that when these craving pathways were active, the frontal lobe was not firing. That's the value of brain imaging research. You can see exactly what's going on. So that's the strongest piece of evidence that we have an addiction at work in overeating. It's not really an eating disorder, it's processed food addiction, just like cocaine addiction is not a snorting disorder, it's cocaine addiction. Yeah.
It's
so when you have that, you have cravings all the time, you have trouble thinking, and the feel-good pathways in that limbic system tend to get downregulated. So you have a whole host of mood disorders, depression, irritability, anxiety, and then you have all the cognitive impairment to attention, learning, decision-making, memory, impulse control. And, eventually you have dementia and Alzheimer's.
So that's probably why we see a lot of Alzheimer's going through the roof and ADD.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How do I know this personally? Because for 24 years now, I've been watching people come off of these processed foods, and a lot of that brain capacity is restored. Really? So yeah, they say things like, oh, I'm able to read again. I wasn't able to pay attention to read, but now I can read again. Or I seem to know what to do in situations. Their decision-making capabilities are better. It's a very cool process to get somebody off of processed foods, but not easy.
So you're in economics, political science, yet here you are really an expert on food addiction. Was there some turning point where you were addicted to food, and how did that affect you?
Well, in 1996, I had my gorgeous Stanford MBA, and I was not going back to work. I was too sick. I had 2 gorgeous children and a wonderful husband, and I was yelling at them all the time. I had done things a lot, like therapy and women's groups and 12-step groups, to try to get my temper under control. And I was also a yo-yo dieter. So in January of 1996, I started a new diet, which eliminated sugars and flours. And at the end of 3 weeks, I thought, wow, I haven't really had to yell at anybody in 3 weeks. And it hit me that these taking out the sugars and flours had this long desired impact on my personality, that I was a much more cheerful person, a nicer person. Yeah. So we got the processed foods out of our house, and my kids' grades went up and their popularity went up because they were nice. I tried telling every other mom in school about this, and none of them were able to do it. And it sent me on a 24-year quest to find out, what is the problem? Why don't people just grab onto this? And finally, after writing the textbook, most of the textbook, I realized this is very severe addiction. And so you can try to tell somebody, through their frontal lobe, you can try to teach them how to change their food, and it will do absolutely no good at all. Because once that craving pathway gets hyperactivated, the frontal lobe, memory, desire, all that motivation just stops firing, and the addiction pathway has control of behavior. You can it goes over, and people have these kind of out-of-body experiences like, I don't want to go there, but I'm going there. I don't want to put that in my mouth, but I'm putting it in my mouth. That's an addiction.
So a lot of people think when they fail on a diet, it's a personal failing. And it seems that your approach is to treat processed food addiction like any other addiction, whether it's narcotics or alcohol addiction or gambling.
Yeah, except that it's much more difficult. I'm writing a course, one of my next few will be on the severity of processed food addiction versus drug and alcohol addiction, people know that drug and alcohol addiction is very hard to put into remission. We now have research showing that it might take 5 years and multiple treatment attempts before somebody can get to their first year of abstinence. With processed food addiction, it's just so much worse because you have constant food stimulation in our environments. It starts very, very young, with 50% sugar in baby formula. And and there are a lot of different substances. So the more different substances you have, the harder it is to put into remission. If you walked into a drug counselor with that kind of a history of usage, you'd be in a residential facility that night if it were recognized drugs, but these aren't recognized as drugs. So what I did was I said, okay, the next thing to residential is intensive outpatient programs. So I created an online program where we have 4 hours a day of live programming, and people can just keep increasing their usage of the program until they have control of their food. The saving grace in all of this is mirror neurons. So it's scattered throughout our whole brain, everywhere in the brain. There are these very particular specialized neurons, they're called mirror neurons, and they do one thing, and they do it automatically, which is they direct the brain to copy what people around us are doing. So we know the frontal lobe is not going to help us, but if we can get those mirror neurons in a group watching healthy people, those mirror neurons will start to control behavior and direct that person to do healthy things.
I think also another challenge with food is there's still, like, we all know alcohol is bad and we know what alcohol is and isn't, but there's still debate on what is a processed food. For example, is chicken a processed food? Because chicken is not a natural animal. Cow's not a natural animal. These are...
Yeah, it's really, really super excellent question. So the thing that makes a plant addictive is the concentration of the natural endorphins in the plant. So when you take a grain of wheat, which has gluten, and gluten has a natural morphine, gluteomorphine, and you take out the fiber and you concentrate it and you make it very easily digestible, there is enough gluteomorphine now reaching the brain fast enough to actually create a high. And that is, so you just think about sugar cane, you could chew on sugar cane all day without getting high. But once it's crystallized into crystal sugars, you can get high off of it. You get a high and then a crash. And then the crash is so painful that then you're 20 minutes later after eating, you're out there seeking more food.
So, like, going back to what you're saying about like the structure of what we eat, there's companies that are going beyond that, like Beyond Beef, Impossible Burger, where they're clearly processed foods. They're made in a lab, but they're saying, well, our macros and our is the exact same as what you would find in a piece of beef, except it's going to be healthier for you. What are your thoughts?
So my deal is the addictive parts of it, and there are not addictive properties to animal proteins, with the exception of like a big chunk of fat that will activate the same pathway as marijuana. But it's mostly plants. When you process a plant and you concentrate those endorphins, then you have an addictive reaction.
Okay, so it's other than like going to, I don't know, like self-help or getting educated, it's very hard. Like right before this podcast, like I said, I was very hungry. I would have eaten whatever, because when you're hungry, you make decisions that later you'll regret.
Yes, very good point. So one of the things we do, so our program is called the Addiction Reset Community, is the people in there are preparing foods. Like they'll prepare a lot of food for a couple of days and they'll just portion it out. It'd be like fast food, but it's in their refrigerator and it's clean. So the food management is definitely a part of the skill set. And this is the way I think about it. You need a skill set to overcome an addiction. And with processed food addiction, you need a skill set around how to avoid cueing that food stimulation, which will activate the craving pathway and run your behavior. stressful relationships, food preparation, carrying your food with you. These are things that are not commonly done in our culture, but you're seeing them more and more. So that's when I say 4 hours a day of live meetings, we're not talking about food per se. We're talking about the other 8% of the problems that food create, like recovering from depression and fatigue and medical issues. I'm not a practitioner. I'm offering this on a peer support basis, but people's lives change so dramatically once they get off those processed foods. And it can take a long time. It can take a year or two to get down the whole list of processed foods.
How about these diets, like a keto diet or a paleo diet? Are these fads or are these solutions?
Well, I like, so the conference that I was just speaking at in Miami was a low carb USA. They put on incredible conferences. They're just really piercing the confusion and delivering new perspectives. So keto is a non-addictive food plan with the exception of cheese. And so I love speaking to those audiences. Those audiences are full of practitioners who are recommending a keto food plan, and they can see that their patients can't follow it. And they're like, why? What did I do? What's wrong with them? Are they lazy? Are they just not trying hard enough? No, none of those things. It's like there's this invisible wall between the practitioner and the patient of the addiction. The practitioner can't see it. The patient can't see it. The media is not reporting on it, but there it is. And so once you start to address the addiction, you can make progress.
So it sounds like your whole mission is educating people on how to not be a victim, but take control of their own addiction.
Yeah, so you have to be in a group, because the only way into this brain, you can't educate per se, because that part of the brain's not really firing very well, but you can copy. So my mission right now is really to get every health practitioner trained in how to create these online groups over Zoom, just the way we're doing now. We meet 3 times a day on Zoom and then once on a conference call. So my goal right now is to teach every practitioner how to create an online community, so you can activate those mirror neurons.
So basically, it's getting their patients into a community in which they feel safe, and they can talk about how to get off food, and they're not fat shamed or shamed about their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. No, we have a few rules. One is that we don't talk about body shape. It's painful what this culture has done to people's acceptance and enjoyment of their own bodies. We don't talk about bodies, and we don't talk about food. We have plenty of support for them to learn how to work their food. We don't talk about politics, sex, or race, or religion.
Probably very smart in what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, stress is the #1 activator of overeating. So everything that we do in our online communities is stress-free. People come in, they talk about their problems, they get ideas for solving them. We don't tell them what to do, but it's very kind. It's very kind. It's very compassionate. It's very slow, and people finally have a chance to sink into a process they can be successful at long term.
That's amazing. And what is, like, when somebody gets off of food, when do they know they're getting benefits? How long does it take? And what?
Cool. There is a withdrawal syndrome, and that's one of the criteria for, does somebody have an addiction? So you ask somebody, when you stop using whatever food or drink it is, do you feel worse? They say, yeah, I'll get a headache, or I'll get really irritable, or I'll be so tired. That's the beginning of withdrawal. So that's withdrawal avoidance if they pick up the substance again. 4 days. 4 days. It's a 4-day acute withdrawal, similar to alcohol. And then at the end of 4 days, they can expect to have the brain fog lift, the cravings lift, the fatigue lift, Like, I remember that from January 4th, 1996. I didn't know that those things would happen, but here I am sitting at my dining room table, going from breakfast to lunch without thinking about food. I didn't even know I had cravings. I'd had them so strongly my whole life. I thought everybody thought about food all the time.
So for
Getting if it's right, we have to really are people to really check their blood glucose if they need to, their blood pressure, if they're taking medication, those things will start to head towards normal in the first week.
right, so like in 24 years, you've never had pizza, you've never
Oh no,
had
I've
cake.
had lapses. No, I've had lapses. I've definitely had lapses, and it's something that I really teach my members, which is, again, going back to Nora Volkoff and her work. She's the executive director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. She is really strong on lapsing as normal, especially in a culture where the triggering is so intense. And so in a group, you can get right back on. Maybe you're going to have a headache for a couple of days, but that's another reason to be in a group, because you get those mirror neurons reoriented back to, oh no, I eat healthy, my tribe eats healthy, and then you can get back on.
I know a lot of people who build in cheat days or cheat meals. Is that something you would not advocate?
Right, I would not, because it is a 4-day withdrawal. If it's a small amount, maybe it'll be a 2-day withdrawal. So if you have a cheat meal once a week, you're just in withdrawal half your life. And you do get consequences. It's just like saying, if somebody's going to give up smoking, oh, I'm going to have a cigarette every now and then. Well, no, that does hurt you. And it raises the risk that you're going to relapse and go back to an old pattern of smoking. So we fight for it as hard as we can. I expect people to lapse, and I really teach them to accept that this is just part of this particular condition.
How many online groups do you have right now, and how do you select people to make sure they're in the right group?
So we just have one. I've been beta testing it for 2 years now. We're just rolling out these professional trainings so that anybody can have one for their patients. All practitioners have these long email lists of people who came and weren't able to make diet changes. So my idea is to get these practitioners to go into their old email lists and get these people into an online community where then they can heal. So I just have the one right now. The idea is that we'd have about 125 people, and then we would only charge $14 a week, $49 a month, which is pretty comparable to other online communities, maybe a little less. But it's something like belonging to a faith organization, or like a veterans belonging to a Veterans Affairs, Veterans of Foreign Wars. You're in it for life. It's like AA. Somebody might recover from alcoholism at age 17, die at 87 with 70 years of recovery, but they never forget. Those addiction pathways are programmed for life. And if you stimulate them enough, those old neurons, they will come back up to life and get control of that behavior, and then you're sick again.
So if a practitioner is listening to this and this practitioner they think it's a good idea for their patients, well, how would they get in touch with you?
So we have a website for professionals now, food addiction professionals. Our email is foodaddictionreset@gmail.com. And it's so amazing after 24 years to be at this point of saying, okay, I'm confident that I have something that works better than anything else that's going on out there. It's an addiction recovery model for a very severe addiction. And I think a lot of practitioners just kind of like veered away from addiction studies because they think of addicts as being very difficult and unappealing. But this is an addiction which has attacked all kinds of people. We see a pound per person per day of addictive foods disappearing into the US domestic economy. Sugars, flours, mostly containing gluten, high-fat dairy, and French fries. A pound per person per day. So this is very common, and it's very hidden. as you were saying at the beginning.
I think the biggest challenge of this too, the biggest issue is that nobody wants to think of themselves as an addict when it comes down to food.
So 20 years ago, I would have agreed vehemently with you. And today, people are so desperate. Oh, they have been struggling with this their entire lives. They can tell stories about themselves at 2 years old. And they are actually really relieved to finally get a framework that A, that makes sense, and B, works. You know, recovery from a severe addiction works. You do need those hours per day to reprogram those mirror neurons and get them oriented away from mainstream culture and towards a healthy group. You need hours a day. It's why addictions are typically addressed in residential treatment or in intensive outpatient programs, hours and hours and hours and hours a day to reprogram those neurons.
Does a person attending your group sessions, do they need to be referred by a doctor, or can somebody just go and join?
No, they can go to our online community is at Food Addiction Reset, and they can go in there and sign up, period. And any practitioner can start. We have the first professional training, so any practitioner can start that at any time.
Okay, so anybody can go to foodaddictionreset.com to learn more. You also have your website, www.drjoan.com.
drjoanifland.com, drjoanifland.com. Really enjoy speaking, and it's an effective way to reach people. So the speaker's website, that's where people can go if they need a speaker.
Okay, excellent. And always processed food addiction is your book. So nice to have you on the show. I actually learned a lot.
Good. Yeah, this is new.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's really new. This book is only been out for 2 years. So really only for these few years have practitioners had a scientific basis to stand on. I had a conversation with a doctor recently where he said, you know, I brought this up on blah, 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 and I was ridiculed. People just really attacked the idea of food addiction. I said, not anymore. 2,000 citations in that book, and it's on Amazon. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doctor. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to look at my food choices a little different. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.